Does our country need a national censor? Americans in 1873 thought so. That year, Congress passed a number of laws to prohibit using the mail to distribute obscene, lewd, and lascivious materials. These included birth control devices, sex toys, and personal letters with sexual content. The law also made Anthony Comstock a special agent of the U.S. Postal Service, giving him authority to inspect the mail, pull offensive material, and prosecute the senders. He was even issued a gun for enforcement. Comstock had been the secretary of the New York Society for Suppression of Vice, and had already been enforcing New York laws against sending pornographic or blasphemous material through the mail. He also attacked corruption in the city, and there was plenty of it in 1870s New York. A lot of money was circulating in the city, thanks to profits from federal contracts during the Civil War and the expansion of the nation's railroads. The money attracted unscrupulous businessmen, con men, corrupt politicians, professional gamblers, and prostitutes so bold they advertised on the front page of the city's largest newspaper. Many people saw the corruption rising from the streets to the state capitol and wanted it cleaned up. Comstock's success in shutting down New York pornographers brought him national attention that led to his federal job. After 1 year of searching through the nation's mail, he had seized more than 12 tons of obscene literature and 200,000 pornographic items, including photographs, rings, knives, song lyric sheets, playing cards, and what he referred to as obscene and immoral rubber articles. And Comstock prosecuted the senders. Convinced he was doing God's work, he wasn't inclined toward leniency or forgiveness. If his suspects weren't convicted of violating the so-called Comstock laws, he would file new charges again and again until he got a conviction. For instance, he brought charges against Ezra Heywood 5 times for publishing a pamphlet about marriage and for reprinting poems from Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. The courts refused to charge Whitman with obscenity, so a determined Comstock talked the Interior Department into firing Whitman from his job as a government clerk. In 1913, looking back over his career, Comstock told an interviewer he was responsible for 4,000 arrests, and he was also proud of driving 15 people to suicide. Like Ida Craddock, who took her own life the day before she was to be sent to federal prison for distributing sexually explicit marriage manuals. The pornography industry all but disappeared after Comstock shut down all 5 presses producing obscene literature in the country. But he had plenty of other targets. He prosecuted advocates of birth control. The mere idea of contraception filled him with horror. "Are we to have homes or brothels?" he said. "Can't everybody learn to control themselves?" He brought 8 counts of obscenity against well-known birth control activist Margaret Sanger for publishing a book on family limitation. When the case came before a judge favorable to Comstock's laws, Sanger fled to Britain before she could be convicted. By this time, he was attacking church raffles and bridge games played for prizes. His office arrested a woman for calling her husband a spitzbub on a postcard. A spitzbub was a slang term for a rascal. He even prosecuted the publishers of medical and art textbooks. But then the tide of public opinion started to turn against him. Ever since he'd become the federal mail censor, Comstock had drawn criticism. Newspaper editors slammed him and the Comstock laws for violating the First Amendment. Public criticism grew louder with news of the suicides. In 1913, he was made to look foolish by a New York art dealer. The dealer placed a painting, called September Morn, in his gallery window, and then he hired boys to stand outside and gawk at it. Then the art dealer notified Comstock, who hurried down to the art gallery. He took the owner to court, and he lost. The notoriety drove up the price of the painting. Millions of prints were sold, and it became the best-known painting in America. In 1915, Comstock brought charges against department store employees who changed the clothing on mannequins in a store window. According to one report, the judge read the charge, then turned to where Comstock was sitting. "Mr. Comstock," he said, "I think you're nuts." Comstock died shortly afterward, and over the years, bits and pieces of the Comstock laws were dismantled. An important remnant was removed in 1965, when the Supreme Court lifted all restrictions on the use of contraceptives by married couples. Comstock always said that he worked in the garden of the Lord, where he pulled weeds. But the Lord's garden seemed curiously full of obscenities. When he charged that illustrations in an art magazine were lewd, indecent, filthy, and disgusting, one artist replied, "The chances are no one had an indecent thought about the drawings until they fell under his observation." And a lawyer for the art students said Comstock was blind to the beauties of life. His career had been built on looking at life in the worst light. This video is brought to you by the Saturday Evening Post Digital Archives. Saturday Evening Post members can explore our 200-year-old archive for only $15 a year. Subscribe today.